Welcome to Peculiar Tales, the show where we dive into the stranger things in history, urban legends, ghost stories, and anything else we find, well, peculiar. I'm Dawn.
And I'm Kristy. There's something about ventriloquist dummies that just feel wrong. Maybe it's not just that they look human, it's that they look almost human. Maybe it's the shifty smile, maybe it's the glossy eyes that never quite seem to look at you but never look away, or maybe it's the way they sit there, completely still, until they don't.
And in the 1930s and 40s, there was one dummy that stood above the rest. Not just famous, but beloved, a household name, Charlie McCarthy. He wasn't just popular, he was everywhere. Radio, film, stage. He was as recognizable as the biggest stars of his time.
But the more famous he became, the more people started to notice something unsettling. Charlie wasn't just a prop. To audiences, he had personality, sharp tongue, mischievous, and just a little bit mean. He said things no one else could get away with, especially on live radio. And that's when the story started, because people began to wonder, was Charlie really just a dummy?
One of the oldest stories, whispered more than told, claimed that Charlie McCarthy wasn't made. He was once alive. No one agrees on exactly what happened, only that it ended suddenly. An illness, an accident, something that took him before his time. And his father? He couldn't accept it.
Grief does strange things to people. According to the legend, instead of burying his son, the father kept him. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into something harder to explain, until eventually he made a decision that would follow the boy forever.
Some versions say he hired a craftsman, not to build a doll, but to alter what was already there. To preserve the face, reshape it, hollow it out, turn something once living into something that could be handled, controlled, displayed. And the most disturbing part? People who believe this story say that's why Charlie looks so real. Not because he was well made, but because in some way he was still real.
Then there are the stories from behind the scenes, the ones that don't come from audiences, but from people who work around him, stagehands, assistants, people who had no reason to make things up. And they said that after shows, when the lights were off and everyone had gone home, the theater didn't feel empty. It felt occupied.
One man claimed that he stayed late one night, cleaning up after a performance. Everything was quiet, completely still, until he heard it. A soft sound coming from backstage, not loud, not dramatic, just small. Pitter-patter, pitter-patter, like footsteps, small ones, uneven ones.
He followed the sound slowly, expecting to find someone, another worker maybe. But when he pulled back the curtain, there was no one there, except Charlie, sitting exactly where he had been left, head tilted slightly, smile unchanged, and something in that moment sent unease through the man.
Another story claims someone locked up the dressing room one night with Charlie inside his case. The next morning, the case was still closed, still latched. But inside, Charlie had shifted. Not fallen over, not bumped, but repositioned. Like someone had picked him up and set him back down. And then there's the detail that shows up again and again in these stories. The face. People swore it changed. Not in a way you could prove, but enough that you'd notice if you looked twice. A smile seemed just a little wider than before. Eyes that didn't seem as empty, like something behind them had woken up.
But the strangest part of Charlie's legend didn't happen in the dark theaters. It happened on the radio. In front of millions of listeners, Charlie said things that no one could say. Sharp insults, rude jokes, even comments that pushed right up against what was acceptable at the time. And yet, he never got in trouble for it. Not really. Other performers were censored. Scripts were cut. Lines were changed. But Charlie? He slipped through.
At first, people thought it was just part of the act. But over time, some listeners started to wonder, how was he getting away with it? Unless it wasn't Edgar Bergen speaking at all. Unless Charlie had something to say. And no one, not even Bergen, could control him.
Now, this is where we separate the story from the truth. Because as creepy as all of this is, it's all just an urban legend. Charlie McCarthy was created in the early 1920s by a woodcarver named Theodore Mack. He was based on a Chicago newsboy and cost about $35. Just a piece of carved wood, inspired by a Chicago newsboy. What made him feel real wasn't anything supernatural, it was Edgar Bergen.
His ventriloquism was so precise, so convincing, that audiences genuinely forgot they were listening to one man. He didn't just throw his voice. He gave Charlie timing, attitude, and a personality that felt completely separate from his own. And that illusion was powerful enough to do something interesting. It made people fill in the gaps. They started treating Charlie like he was alive, like he had thoughts and opinions, even a place in the family.
And that's the part I find really interesting, because Charlie wasn't just a character on a show. He was treated like a real person, even at home. Candace Bergen, which was Edgar Bergen's daughter, has talked and even joked that growing up, Charlie was basically like her sibling. Apparently, he had his own space, his own presence in the house, and there were closets filled with different heads for Charlie, different expressions, different moods, which in the context of what we're talking about makes sense, but if you think about it too long, it's creepy.
It is kind of creepy.
Yeah.
It is.
Just open up a cabinet to a bunch of ventriloquist dummy heads.
Yeah, because if you find the smiley one a little creepy, what are you going to do when you see one where he looks annoyed or he's upset?
Right. Exactly.
What happens to the doll when he's moving around when he's in that mood?
Right.
And who decides the mood?
But this is an interesting urban legend, because think of all of the movies and the shows and books that have been written about dolls coming to life. This was quite a ways back, and people were convinced of this urban legend that maybe he wasn't just a doll, maybe he had spirits in him, maybe he was, like the original story said, once an actual boy.
Like Pinocchio in reverse.
Kinda, yeah.
But I'm still kind of stuck on all the heads, and that's a lot to have in your home. You'd think that would be tucked away in a box or something.
Yeah, no, Charlie had presence. And Edgar Bergen, he did such a good job that it really captured people. It made them really believe that Charlie was his own personality.
Now, is Charlie the first ventriloquism doll that was made, or the first famous one?
I don't think that he was the first, but he raked in the numbers.
Because it seems to me most of these wooden dolls,
Mm-hmm.
they all have the same mean, passive-aggressive, sarcastic kind of attitude.
Yeah, not all of them, but a good portion of them do.
It's almost like a requirement.
Yeah, it's part of the gig. You got to be a little snappy. But Edgar and Charlie, their show aired in the same time that Orson Welles' show
Oh, that'll do
would
it.
be on. And though there was the whole panic scenario of the War of the Worlds when it came out, afterwards they looked at the numbers from the radio station, and actually more people were tuned in to Charlie and Edgar than they were to the War of the Worlds.
Wow.
Yeah, when it came out.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
You know, radio was powerful.
It really was.
It was a powerful tool. And whether you were advertising or whether it was a show, like a program week to week, singers, it didn't matter. So I'm not surprised that Charlie was a big deal on radio.
Well, it had to really engage people, right? Because there's no visual stimuli there. It's just audio. You have to take your voice and you have to make people believe every word you're saying and envision it.
Also, like what we said earlier, he was getting away with saying things that were
Yeah.
not allowed. So people are intrigued. What in the what
What
did he
is
just
this?
say? You know?
Yeah, he was so famous that he worked alongside people like Frank Sinatra, Roy Rogers, Groucho Marx, and he was even friends with Robert Ripley, like from Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Now, did Ripley do anything in his museum with this doll?
Actually, in one of the Ripley's Believe It or Not books, there's a whole segment on Charlie.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And Charlie actually had a long-running feud with a comedian, W.C. Fields.
Who's that?
He was a comedian that was on radio at the time. And him and Charlie would playfully toss insults at each other all the time.
Boost those
But
ratings.
they did such a good job at this like feud that they created that audience bought into it. They thought they had this really big feud between the two of them. But that's the key, right? You got to make people believe it, especially when you're doing something like ventriloquism.
Yeah, and like the time era that he was in,
Mm-hmm.
he seems a little too real when you're seeing him.
Mm-hmm.
His person is so good at what he does, people forget he's there,
And creating the character that is Charlie, right?
right? And then at some point, you hear of people like really taking on the roles that they do in life.
Mm-hmm.
Like actors and actresses, for example. Some of them take a long time to decompress long after the movie or the drama's done because
Method
there's
actors.
such, yeah, you know, like
Yeah.
there's such a presence of that fictional character
Mm-hmm.
bonded to them. You almost got to wonder, did that happen to this person with Charlie? How much of Charlie was separate from himself?
Well, that's the thing, right? When you create another character like that, it's almost
It's just his alter ego.
that's what I was just going to say. I think it's almost best to stick with like your alter ego because it would be easier to play off of maybe the snappy bits of your brain that have quick-witted jabs to say and be able to say them in a way that's comical and intriguing and fun and entertaining for people.
Well, this guy cashed in on that.
Yeah, yeah.
Smart guy.
And his daughter actually became an actress later on, but the fact that she talked about Charlie as though, yeah, he was kind of like having a sibling around because Charlie was just always present.
Yeah. So where's Charlie now? Well, he isn't hidden away or lost to time. He's actually preserved, but not in the way legends say. He is part of the permanent collection at the Smithsonian Institution, behind glass. Still smiling, still looking, just a little too real.
And maybe that's why stories like this stick around. Because even when we know something isn't alive, if it looks alive, sounds alive, and is treated like it's alive, at what point does our brain stop making that distinction? And more importantly, why does it feel like something's looking back at us when we know it shouldn't be? And maybe that's where the legend really comes from. Not from anything paranormal, but from how easy we can blur the line between real and not. Maybe when something looks human, sounds human, and acts human, at what point do we stop seeing it as an object and start wondering, what if it isn't? And as always, thank you for joining us on Peculiar Tales. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment, a review, or a rating wherever you listen. It truly helps these stories find their way to new listeners. Be sure to follow us so you never miss an episode. And until the Peculiar calls for another tale, bye for now.